it's another edition of the Penn State Blitz here on Penn Live. And no, to my right is not Greg Pickle, or at least I don't think it's Greg Pickle.
He wishes.
It's my favorite fellow ginger, Dustin Hockensmith, here to talk about Penn State football. It's still the off season, Dustin, but we got 4 downs. A lot has happened since Greg and I chatted last week about Penn State football. So let's just get right to it.
Yeah.
I think we got to lead with a lot of Penn State fans, a lot of Penn State football players, probably a lot of Penn State coaches, alums. Pretty disappointed on Monday night. Saquon Barkley, arguably the best running back in Penn State history, was not invited to the Heisman Trophy ceremony. I think some people saw it coming, but many people were disappointed. But it was. I thought it was very interesting, Dustin, here to see that he had a reaction to that,
yeah.
And it was just all class and a lot of people. I think he's gained even more fans based on how he responded.
And I think his response was exactly what you would expect from Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
I don't need a trophy to be named or to be named a finalist to define me as a player. I've earned the respect from my teammates and coaches, which is absolutely true. Therefore, at the end of the day, that's the only thing that matters. Congratulations to all the deserving Heisman finalists. He's managed to take something that can come off as cliche and artificial, and it comes off as genuine, and it's the real deal. I think he's said the trophy thing on previous occasions, so he means it, and I am in the camp where I wasn't very surprised by it, because I think in the end, to have national voters, I think you can't get past the mental block of numbers, and Bryce Love had better numbers. Lamar Jackson was the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. His numbers were pretty much comparable to what he did last year, and Baker Mayfield, of course, is going to run away with the award. So it is what it is. You can quantify and you can qualify. I don't think there's any question he's one of the top 3 most impactful players in the country, but numbers in the end kind of make a difference here.
Yeah, and it's just the latest in a long line of things that Saquon has done during his Penn State career, and even before it. The story when he was at Whitehall High School, and the girl, I think, fell down or couldn't get a medal, and Saquon gave the girl his gold medal. He's always put others first. James Franklin and his teammates always talk about how he puts the team first. He referenced that when he said he was going to play in the bowl game. You know, he basically said, you know, it could be a business decision, but I want to play for my teammates. I want to play in the bowl game. I don't care where we go. So this to me is, you know, this has just been consistent with how he's conducted himself. And I do think it's fair to point out that I know that Penn State fans are going to be disappointed that he didn't go, but he wasn't going to win the award. And I do think the payoff for Saquon Barkley will be on draft day if he can just stay healthy. He is going to be, I don't see how he's not a top 5 or top 10 pick, and you just got to wish him the best. He's still got 1 game left, but just I was really impressed with the way that he handled himself, and I think maybe he knew it was coming.
I think he probably did too, and it continues to paint the same portrait of Saquon Barkley as all the different positive things that NFL evaluators love about him. And it's the humility, it's this kind of thing, it's the willingness and desire to block and be physical. It's the whole package that makes him a pro prospect. And I really believe that if you took Saquon Barkley, transplanted him at Stanford, and you gave him all the free running room that Bryce Love had, we'd be having an entirely different conversation about him.
Sure, he impacted the game in every facet on offense at Penn State, part of Penn State's design in the Joe Moorhead, James Franklin offense. Even I don't know if he volunteered, but made an impact as a kick returner. I don't know if he was crazy about it, but he did it. Scored a big TD against Ohio State, and at that point, a lot of people thought he might win the award. But it just wasn't meant to be. The numbers weren't great down the stretch. He's got 1 more game, and that brings us to 2nd down. Dustin, we learned Penn State's postseason fate. It's the Fiesta Bowl. A rare meeting with Washington, another 10-2 team from the Pac-12. The game will be December 30th, 4 o'clock, out in the desert in the Arizona, not in the Arizona area. What's Arizona?
It's Arizona.
It's Arizona. It's in the desert. I think it's in the Tempe
Home of the
area.
Rocky Mountains, Bob.
Isn't Sedonia out there somewhere? I don't know. Yeah, it's a 4 o'clock game on ESPN. I think Penn State's going to be a slight favorite going into the game. What did you think of the matchup? A lot of people thought they were going to go to the Cotton Bowl in Dallas and probably play somebody. But what do you think? What are your thoughts initially when you heard that was the matchup?
Yeah, I like the matchup. I think Washington, there are probably sexier teams out there, but Washington is a really, I compare the growth of the Washington program to where Penn State is too, where they both kind of blossomed at the same time into a national contender. There was chaos leading up to it, and I can't help but laugh weekly all these bowl projections, and weekly everybody, it was set in stone. Penn State was going to the Cotton Bowl. It was just a matter, is it TCU, is it Notre Dame, whoever, and then you get to throw in a curveball, and it just makes those things even more meaningless. And then the speculation before the announcement is made, just wait until the announcement is made. But Washington is a good team. Bad loss, I think, to Arizona State.
Yeah. But
at the end here, you have Myles Gaskin, a great running back. You've got Jake Browning, a quarterback. Penn State needs to have its house in order from Michigan State to now to really contain that kind of offense. Defensively, I think greater than the sum of the individual parts is what I would say about them. They have a really good nose tackle inside.
Yeah,
it's going to be a good matchup. I think Penn State opened as about a 3-point favorite, and that's what I would have guessed it would have been.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of myself that I didn't know that Arizona and the Fiesta Bowl were linked together, so I'm going to have to live with that probably for the rest of my life. Just a couple other notes on the game itself. Penn State and Washington, I think they've only played twice.
Yep.
And this is the first meeting, I think, since 1983. They just don't really intersect very much. That was a low-scoring game. I'm not sure if this will be a low-scoring game, but you mentioned Jake Browning. They have a great defense. James Franklin has done wonders at Penn State. I think Chris Peterson, I believe the former Boise State coach, has really fast-tracked Washington. And I think if they had not had that loss that a lot of people didn't see coming to Arizona State, I think, much like Penn State and maybe the loss to Michigan State, this is a team that had probably top 5, top 8 potential, would have been in the conversation, but this is still a very nice matchup. I would have to think of the millions of bowl games that fans are going to see. I think the Penn State-Washington matchup has got to be one of the top 4 or 5 games probably on the bowl slate.
I don't think you're going to get 52-49 out of it, but I don't think it needs to be that kind of game to be entertaining. One thing I thought was interesting, they both have offensive coordinator stuff happening.
Sure.
Ricky Rahne just getting to promotion, and Washington hiring somebody who won't be there until the end of the NFL season. So what's that going to do? And you give both these coaches 3 weeks to prepare, and who knows what can happen when you throw both teams out there.
Well, let's get to third down, Dustin. You mentioned...
I spoiled it, sorry.
It's okay. So anyway, so you mentioned Ricky Rahne, excuse me. He's the Penn State's new offensive coordinator. Greg Pickle and I talked about it last week, where he was probably at the very top of James Franklin's list if he didn't go outside the program. So why Ricky Rahne? James had a chance to kind of address his thoughts on why he just elevated a guy that's been with him for a long time. He brought him from Vanderbilt, a Cornell quarterback. Why do you think Ricky Rahne was the guy that James Franklin had at the very top of those lists he keeps?
Well, I think continuity was a big deal here, and you managed to cover all your bases on the recruiting front. You managed to get somebody who was a protege of Joe Moorhead and just move him up the coaching ladder. I think he really views Ricky Rahne as an up-and-comer in the field, and he's a guy who's coached quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends. He knows the playbook inside and out. He'll have a vision and an idea of where he wants to go. I don't know what that vision or idea is or how it might differ from Joe Moorhead, and we'll get a taste of that in the Fiesta Bowl. But I'm okay with that. I think he, as much as college football is about player development, I think James Franklin is a believer in coach development too, and you've seen that with a few other guys. Charles Huff being one of them after he followed Moorhead to Mississippi State. Yeah, and I think James was asked about it on Sunday after the bowl selection, and essentially, one of the comfort was a big factor. His quote, I believe, paraphrasing, is you don't go out and hire someone to run someone else's offense. Ricky, was around Moorhead for 2 years. I don't know that the RPO spread that Moorhead ran at Penn State and probably will run at Mississippi State will look exactly with what Rahne wants to do. There's going to be a lot of the same elements. James also, I think, was very comfortable with Ricky because of his relationship with the 3 quarterbacks in Penn State's system. Trace McSorley, he'll be back. Tommy Stevens, who everyone thinks is going to be back, and he should be back, obviously. And then Sean Clifford, who is really, big picture down the future, in the future, the guy maybe that they're targeting to run the offense and the Rahne offense. I think it's going to be fascinating, Dustin, to see. There's going to be some tweaks. No one can really run Joe Moorhead's offense the way that he ran it, and there's other components to it. One of the things I think Joe Moorhead did great was in-game adjustments, and that's just something that, he was a head coach at Fordham. He had been an offensive coordinator before. Ricky Rahne's kind of getting his feet wet. There's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. I just think, maybe a year or two from now, it won't be quite what we saw from Joe Moorhead. It'll be different, and maybe different is a good thing. I don't know about that. But Ricky Rahne, you have to think James Franklin's a guy who has contingency plans for his contingency plans. And it was pretty common knowledge that Moorhead was a prime contender to leave after this season. So I have to believe that Rahne, working in close capacity with Joe Moorhead, was probably being steered with the idea of making this move at some point. And then to have Phil Galliano move into special teams, that was a contingency plan too. Tyler Bowen, the former grad assistant who was at Fordham, who was at Maryland coaching offensive linemen, a really great addition back onto the staff. So a lot of this stuff was seamless, and I think it's because James Franklin had thought about it for a long time before this actually happened.
Yeah, and interesting to see that Joe Moorhead did take Charles Huff with him. He also took, I believe, Andrew Briner just recently.
Yes.
He was the Fordham head coach and obviously a disciple, a protege of Moorhead.
From Hershey.
Yeah, he's gonna basically be Joe Moorhead Jr. Down there at Mississippi State, kind of run the passing game, also coach the quarterbacks. So it's nice to see Joe Moorhead kind of filling out what looks like it'd be a pretty interesting offensive staff. Be curious to see what he does on the defensive side, but I just think that Ricky Rahne made a lot of sense in the short term, and I think that James, if he was, it was kind of now or never, I think, for him to be the offensive coordinator. If you pass him over now, I think you're sending the message that he's probably never going to be my guy if you're James Franklin.
Yeah.
I think James believes in what Ricky Rahne can do, how he can grow, how he can recruit. And it's going to. I do think you have to be a little bit patient with him. I think this year and the next, especially life without Barkley. It's great to have all those quarterbacks back, but and they like Miles Sanders, but there really is only one Saquon Barkley, and I think maybe they might have to take a little step back before they can take a step forward. Penn State did not exactly start fast under Moorhead.
Yeah.
The Michigan game kind of got ugly, but as the team got more comfortable in that offense, you saw the payoff.
100%. And one last word from me on this is Ricky Rahne used the continuity was part of the appeal in the present tense, and in the future too, because I think James Franklin was leery of getting some kind of nomadic figure to come in for a 1 or 2 year deal. I think you might see in Ricky Rahne a guy who can be in that position for much longer than 2 years.
Sure. And now we're going to get to fourth down, and no surprise, Penn State was never really in the hunt for one of the 4 playoff slots. But Dustin, I just got the sense just on Twitter and just talking to people on Sunday, people in my family, people everywhere had just a gigantic beaming smile on their faces when Ohio State got left out of the 4th slot after they beat Wisconsin in the Big Ten title game in what was not really an overwhelming effort there on Saturday night. And the committee chose to go with Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, and the last team was Alabama, the one-loss team that didn't win the SEC. So 2 SEC teams in the playoff. Penn State fans, I'm sure, are thrilled after what happened last year as they won the Big Ten title and didn't get in, and Ohio State did. Thrilled that the Buckeyes got left out after 2 really one-sided losses. But just your thoughts on the field, and my question for you is, how do you think Penn State matches up with those teams? And was there one team in particular maybe that you thought if they played in a semifinal, it might be the best matchup for Penn State?
Well, a couple things. I think there would have been fury if Ohio State would have been in. I think there's a big faction out there that was glad and happy to see Ohio State get the short end of it, but their resume was essentially the same as Penn State's last year. And so I think if you lose on the road by 31 points and that's your second loss of the year, I think that should be an automatic you're out. So I think the 4 teams are the best. The best matchup for Penn State, I would not like an Alabama or a Clemson matchup because you have those big freakish dudes on the defensive line. Penn State's offensive line would have to grow up in an awful hurry to really be able to contain that and move the ball against them. Georgia is the same way. Oklahoma would be a really fun, high-flying matchup. I think Penn State would score some points. That could be a 52-49 kind of deal like USC was. Absolutely.
That's the game I think that if those two met, whether it would be in a bowl game or in the national semifinal or in the final, I mean, that is really the first one to 50 is probably going to win that game. I don't know. I really believe that with time to prepare and more, with Moorhead's offense in place, even with Rahne running it, I mean that could have just been a tremendous game. Oklahoma was a little short, I think, on the defensive side of the ball, and they were more about just trying to outscore the other guy, much like Penn State was 2 years ago. You're right. It sure feels like that would be a game that Penn State not only could stay in, but maybe even win late with players like McSorley and Saquon Barkley. Their defense. Their pass defense would probably be up against it, much like they were in the Ohio State and Michigan State games. But Oklahoma doesn't have the front 4 that Ohio State did, in a neutral site game on a fast track, that would be. I think that's the one team in the tournament that Penn State could play with and even beat. I'm with you. The matchups probably would not make for a great match with the other 3 games, and I'm just wondering, after Alabama and Clemson just fire away at each other in a 15-round fight, or 12-round fight now. I think the winner of the other game's in a good spot because it's tough, I think, to bounce back from win or lose. I mean, I think it's going to be tough for the winner of the Clemson-Alabama game to physically get up to play again for a second week. I think Georgia is a team that no one's really talking about, but you watch them against Auburn, and they're built around defense in the running game, and it's not always pretty, but they just have athletes everywhere. I think that's the team I'm going to be watching in the tournament. I thought Clemson had a shot last year. Dusty, I don't think anyone's talking about Georgia, and that's the team I think that might be able to win this.
It's interesting. You have these three teams, Clemson, Georgia, Alabama, who are 3 of, if not the 3 biggest recruiting powerhouses in the country. Ohio State certainly in there, Florida State too. Oklahoma, always been very good. But you have these teams. Oh, so Georgia, not being discussed, they do have athletes everywhere. They have 4- and 5-star talent all over the field. Their trio of running backs is an intimidating force. Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, and the Pennsylvania kid, DeAndre Swift, all there. You can mix and match, kind of like what Alabama does with their running backs. So I do think that they're not being discussed that much. I found it interesting that both the SEC teams, as much as people want to say the depth of the SEC wasn't what you're accustomed to seeing from it, they're both favored in opening point spreads as the lower seeded teams. I think Clemson's the most versatile team of the bunch. They can win ugly, they can win pretty if they need to, so that will come in handy if they do advance and play Oklahoma. I have Oklahoma winning it, though.
I love it.
Offense over defense.
One quick follow-up before we get, are we going to get to some overtime? Salim says overtime. I love it. Just one quick thought. I think just big picture thinking, Dustin. This is the second year. This is the second year the Big Ten champ did not get in the tournament. Everyone talks about the Big Ten East. Everyone talks about the Big Ten brand and Jim Delaney. Just curious. I'm just curious. What do you think is Jim Delaney's reaction to this and moving forward? I've been talking about it in season. I don't know how realistic it is. Would there be a movement afoot maybe to realign the Big Ten a little bit to get some of the Big Ten East teams out of the East, maybe into the West, and ensure? I know Wisconsin was unbeaten, but I think what worked against them was the fact that it wasn't really that hard for them to get to the title game. And there's some teams that never really get a chance to play in the Big Ten title game because they're all in the Big Ten East.
What red tape would Jim Delaney have to go through to reorganize the Big Ten?
Right.
I honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. Competitively, I think you need to.
Yeah.
The hope has always been, and you followed Nebraska for a long time, I think they're a key team to starting to bring power, the balance of the power on both sides, but I don't know if you'll ever truly get it. Not unless Iowa makes a grand step forward and consistently plays good football. Yeah. Northwestern, they are who they are at this point. Iowa, I would say the same thing. Like P.J. Fleck in Minnesota, but it's hard to forecast them as a true national player.
See what I'm doing there? Rowing the boat.
You are rowing the boat. Yeah, I thought you were doing flies or something, but close either way. So I don't know. The way that they're aligned now, I don't think it'll be a long time, if ever, before you have true balance.
Yeah.
If they're not considering it, they probably should for the sake of this argument. I just don't know. It's tough to say.
Yeah, I mean, because Alabama's not going away, Clemson's not going away, Georgia is definitely not going away. So it's going to be interesting to see, if Penn State continues to play well, Ohio State continues to be Ohio State, and if Michigan can ever get its act together on offense. I mean, those are 3 potential top 10 teams, and you're taking 2 of them out of the equation. The way it's constituted, do you just not have divisions and just have 1 through 14? I don't know what you can do, but I have to think that Jim Delaney, the presidents and the ADs are going to have to address this because it's not good for the brand. It's not good financially, and
And guess what? It's not a surprise at all.
Yeah.
Anybody who saw the way the division shook out right away knew the balance of power was going to be an issue. And I don't know whether it was dollars and cents. I don't know whether it was made to accommodate Maryland and Rutgers in the same division and try to establish these rivalries with Penn State. But it was misguided, and I think somebody needed to speak some common sense before you had the divisions in the first place. 4
downs here on the Penn State Blitz completed. So that leaves only one thing, and that one thing possibly might be overtime. Do we have any overtime? Dustin, I think it's going to be all you.
Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm looking.
Can you see?
I'm
I love
looking right at me.
All right.
All right. Charles, have you checked out Rashad Penny from San Diego State, Heisman Award winner? He could have been, and if you were looking at the numbers game, he led the country in rushing over Bryce Love, too. So I think he was slated as well. If you expanded from 3 to 5, would Rashad Penny, would Saquon Barkley, would either or both be in there?
Yeah, I mean, I have a Heisman vote. I won't go into the details of it because they ask you not to release how you voted. I'll just tell you some of the players that I considered. Rashad Penny played against Penn State in 2015, returned a kickoff 100 yards for a touchdown. That's when they had Donnell Pumphrey. But you just saw him in a very limited opportunity. You could tell he was dazzling. I did watch his highlights. I did see the stats. I looked long and hard. There were some games down the stretch where he carried like 20 times for 50 yards. He had some tremendous games. The one player I feel, Saquon Barkley is, to me, the most talented player in college football. I'll say that.
Sure.
The one player watching the season unfold, watching the stretch one, seeing who Penn State played, the one player that I think will not be talked about enough because he didn't get the chance because of the way they coached was J.K. Dobbins of Ohio State. To me, that first game he played against Indiana when they gave him the ball 29 times, he took over that game. You could see against Penn State that he was clearly their best runner, but he was in a timeshare with Mike Weber, who's not nearly as talented. He was a difference maker against Wisconsin in the Big Ten title game. I thought Dobbins was the best player that Penn State saw this year, and I thought if he had gotten more opportunities, I think he deserved to be actually in the Heisman conversation. He can also catch the ball, but I do get what he's saying about Penny. A very good player, and when they do announce the voting, usually it's the top 10. I think maybe both those guys will be somewhere in the top 10.
They'll be knocking on the door beyond that top 3. Mitch says traditionally Heisman winners have been bust in the NFL anyway, even though would have been nice to have him in the mix. I don't know.
It's a little bit like sour grapes. I understand the argument. There's a couple points, Dustin, I want to run by you. It's a quarterback's league, college football.
Yeah.
The more you touch the ball, the greater your stats are going to be. And if you're a dual threat quarterback, the odds of a running back getting the award, it's just probably not going to happen that much, if at all. He's got to have just unbelievable stats. The other thing I think that isn't really being talked about, and James Franklin was asked about it. The design of the RPO is to call the play or get the ball to the person based upon what the defense is doing. So, they would always kind of crowd and try and take Barkley out of the game, and Penn State's response would be either McSorley would keep the ball and run it or throw it. I mean, I just think at some point you got to tweak your system. He didn't get the ball enough. He did not get the ball enough down the stretch. And if you want to make the argument that he got slighted, I think Penn State's got to look at it a little bit like, hey man, we had the most talented player in the country. We didn't get him the ball enough. I mean, I didn't feel like he got the ball enough against Ohio State. I didn't feel like he got the ball enough against Michigan State. Against Maryland, when he's trying to get to Evan Royster's rushing record, I think he had 12 carries or 16 carries. I understand what Penn State is about, and no player is bigger than the program or the offense. But I mean, I think Saquon was a little bit of a victim of what their offensive approach was.
Yeah, and the fact that he's so good that if you had to pick your poison, everybody was picking him as the poison. Was 43 touches at Iowa, was that enough for you?
That was enough.
Are you looking for 60?
No, but I mean, you never really saw them commit to him like that in a game. I don't know that his combined rushes, receptions, and even kick returns ever got to 30 in a game.
Yeah.
And I just think when you're 5'11", 230 pounds, I mean, he's not going to have a lot of he's not got a lot of wear and tear on him. It's just another thing the NFL is going to love.
Yeah.
But I mean, if he's going to carry it 12 or 14 times, catch 3 passes, and return 2 kicks, it's really hard to have 250 all-purpose yards. It just is, and that's what I think with the voters. It's not like the voters are actually going to watch the tape and see how good he is. They're going to look at the stats. And the stats just didn't measure up.
They did not measure up, and that's why he's here. Kevin Fogarty, we got 2 more here.
I know Kevin Fogarty. I know that name.
It sounds like you might be a steady commenter on these things. It says Pickle's gone, but now you and Dustin are dressed the same. The creep factor is always high on these videos.
Gingers and same shirted. We didn't even consult.
I'm surprised the camera hasn't exploded from sexiness yet. He also has
I think we both have sunburn as well from these lights because we're so pale.
Our color range also pink to red, nowhere beyond that. Kevin also asked your thoughts on moving on from Manny Bowen. I'd love to win the bowl game, but getting Cam Brown and others some game experience seems invaluable.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things I talked about it a little today. I don't know what the plan is for Manny Bowen. He's been suspended for 3 games now. He was suspended last year for the Rose Bowl.
Yep.
When you're suspended for 3 games, obviously something serious has happened, and you just wonder, how big is the punishment? James didn't come right out and say he's out for the rest of the year, but James can be a little bit coy about that stuff. He's the only really experienced linebacker they have coming back. They had to lean on Brandon Smith with him out. Koa Farmer's still kind of figuring out. He's really more of a safety who doesn't really play in the box much. Jason Kabinda is gone. That's a big, if Manny Bowen is done at Penn State, or if he's out, or he's on a very short leash, I mean, you just wonder about his future. And the linebacker position next year is going to be, I think, very closely watched. They have some players they like, some freshmen they like. They have some players like Jay Cooper who have not really, I think, grown into or stayed healthy enough to be the player they want him to be. But you can play a 4-2-5, but you still have to be, at the end of the day, as Bill O'Brien used to like to say, you still have to have 2 linebackers you can trust, not only to play well, but to get the guys in the right spots. And I think, in the offseason, that the linebacker spot and also the safety spot are going to be some, they have a lot of athletes, but they don't have a lot of players with a lot of experience. You mentioned Cam Brown, who certainly, he's very athletic, but he doesn't really look like a linebacker. I don't know how much more weight he can put on his frame, but he's like 6'6", 228, and you almost just wonder if he's more suited to be like a pass rusher or a defensive end. But yeah, it's a great question. I don't know about Manny Bowen. I don't know what your thoughts are about the linebacker position, but I just think, they have a lot of athletes, and they might get some more athletes on December 20th. But I think it's a real area of concern.
This is where you start to see, in the sanctions and all the way to this point, starting in 2012, you start to see and feel the bumps in the road recruiting, numbers, misses, guys who have decommitted, linebacker. You're going to start to feel the issues that you've had the past several years where you bottom out a little bit at the linebacker spot. Next year might be the year that you do that. Cam Brown, I've had this question all along. Is he a linebacker? Is he defensive end? They've taken this position. They've dedicated 2 years of development time to linebacker. Is he a future linebacker there, a true blue linebacker? I still have questions about it because he doesn't fit and conform to your traditional linebacker dimensions, which I don't think are superficial. I think you need to be more stout. You need 6'5" is a strange looking linebacker.
It is.
Any updates on Isheem Young's status? I would just say no to that one. I think it could be a long time. I think if you're a Penn State fan, you probably root for him to get to where he wants to go in life, but you won't see him in blue and white.
I mean, I think everyone knows he's facing some serious legal issues without going into too great detail on it. I think there's some things that probably have to play themselves out, but he is part of, or originally was part of the 2018 class. I think there have been instances where James Franklin has kind of cut ties from players who have gotten in trouble. If everything that's being reported is true, I think it would be hard to expect him. I mean, I think you wish the best for him, but I don't know that Penn State maybe would want to include him in the 2018 class.
Tom Dincher, I was at the same wedding as Tom Dincher, commenting on, and he came up to me and was like, "I love you I love the podcast."
How do you know it's that Tom? There's so many Tom Dinchers. It's such a Dincher is a popular last name. Are you sure it's that Tom Dincher?
If you're fake Tom Dincher, I apologize. He said no offense to Greg, but you guys are great together. We know that. Would love to see you guys talk together a lot more. Not me.
Well, Salim's talking. Our boss, our video guy, Salim is talking about maybe a buddy picture. I mean, in the off season, there's ESPN 30 for 30s. Maybe like a 45-minute, like a little production. I don't know. We're still hammering out some of the details, but we might be debuting something in summer. I don't know. It might involve shorts. I don't know. It could involve.
It's a tough season for you.
Eating contests. Who knows? There's a lot of things we do that you don't know about, and we're very good at. But I just don't know if we could make any money off it.
2 thoughts. You had me at eating contest, and God help us all if that is actual real situation. Tom also had a question. Any chance Rahne adds a more power run game? Maybe. I think.
So you know what he's driving at, right?
If you're the under center fullback crowd, I think that's what we're talking about here. Yeah. I do think that Miles Sanders is better equipped to run north-south. And nobody's better equipped to do anything than Saquon Barkley. Let's put that caveat there. But Miles Sanders, his style is more north-south.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that translates to power run game in the future or not.
This is what I think everyone's getting at is tight ends, fullbacks, yada, yada, yada. Look, they don't have any of the tight end cast that's returning. I don't see a thumper of a blocker in that group. Maybe it'll be Nick Bowers, but he was not on the field a lot this year when they could have used some help in the run game. And I don't think they do not have a scholarship fullback on the roster. Now, maybe you can say, well, walk-ons can handle that role and we'll run Sanders out of an I formation. I don't think that's going to happen. The one thing I would say is fair game as far as the running game and a Ricky Rahne tweak is I don't see any reason why once in a while you can't put the quarterback under center and run a quarterback sneak. I mean, you don't need a fullback, you don't need a tight end. I mean, I know Trace McSorley, is not the biggest guy, but it's an easy conversion. Matt McGloin was like 12 for 13 in 2012 converting quarterback sneaks. That's the one thing I think that is fair game to say is it was almost like they were stubborn. Just instead of taking the snap and making the decision, get under center, snap the ball, and wedge it, half a yard forward.
If you give this crowd an inch, Bob,
they will.
They're going to want a mile.
Yeah, that's the one thing I look for.
I get what they're saying about your practice routine and wanting to perfect the thing that you do and what your identity is offensively, but I could.
There were so many times when it was 3rd and 1 and they lined up with McSorley deep next to Barkley and against a good team, and you're just like they're not going to get this because the other team knows they're going to run the ball. And if you sneak it, I mean, it doesn't really matter if you have a great front four. If you snap it and they don't react quick enough, you're still going to get the first down. I think they left too many plays on the field the last 2 years, and that's what's got the fan base upset. They were much better at converting 3rd and 8 than they were 2nd and 1, 3rd and 1, and even 4th and 1. I think that to be a more efficient offense, you could tweak it a little bit.
They have a more straightforward plan for 3rd and 8 than they do for 3rd and 1. One last question from Pat Romano here. How would the selection committee have looked at 3-loss Auburn versus 2-loss Penn State if we were in an 18 playoff? This is hypotheticals on hypotheticals here.
I think Penn State had a pretty good chance considering how they lost. They lost 2 games on the road. They had the lead in both games entering the 4th quarter. The game that got away from me wasn't the Ohio State game. It was the Michigan State game. It was a weird weather day, but they got shut out in the 4th quarter. They just missed making 2 plays that I think probably would have changed the game on offense. Marcus Allen got called for the roughing the passer penalty that would have probably sent the game into overtime instead positioned Michigan State for the field goal. I felt like Penn State was better than Michigan State. But I thought that Ohio State had taken over the game. I think that Penn State would absolutely be in the conversation for one of the 8 spots. I think the win at Iowa was good. I think the win at Northwestern was impressive. I know Michigan was not Michigan of, Bo Schembechler, 1978, but I think their schedule was good enough. They had a dynamic player, and I think, the fact that they kind of got, hosed last year. I can say hosed.
Sure you
the
can.
fact they got hosed last year, I think they definitely would have been on the 8. I feel a little bit bad for Auburn. You beat Georgia, then you beat Alabama, and then you reward for that handily both games. You got to go play Georgia again on a neutral field, and they have all the intangibles, and the game just got away from them. I think they were also not healthy for that game. I feel bad for Auburn. I thought they definitely are one of the eight best teams in the country.
Yeah, I think it would have been an interesting conversation. I would like to see both of them, and why choose?
I bet Penn State fans would not have included Ohio State in their 8 either.
Or their 16.
Or they're 64. Or they're 64.
One last note, that is the real Tom Denter. You just clarified. Hey, Tom.
All right, we're going to wrap this up, this edition of the Penn State Blitz here on Penn Live. Before we go, just a reminder, we have this awesome Penn Live Penn State channel on YouTube. I don't know if you guys have been following. I'm sure that you have. If you haven't, you're out of your mind. They have great videos, great stuff on Barkley. I mean, it's just every week it's something new. The videos to kind of get the fan base excited for the game. We started doing them, I think, during the second half of the season. I thought they were hilarious. So you guys need to just start subscribing to that channel. If you haven't, you go to youtube.com/allpennstate. That's Dustin Hockensmith. He's going to be back at some point. You have not heard the last from the both of us. I just don't know if the buddy-buddy picture's ever going to get off the ground. We'll just have to wait and see.